Salut, c'est Aurélie. This week I'm going back to university after 2 weeks and a half of holidays, and going back to uni means the beginning of the second semester, but it also means the end of the first semester. So I thought that today I was gonna tell you about the content of the lessons I got during the first semester of my second year of studying translation in Belgium. But first, you have to know that everything I'm gonna say is based on me, my experience, my opinion. And if you ask any other student, their opinion is gonna be different. And my opinion is also linked to the university I'm studying at. I don't know. But anyway, where I'm studying, because in Belgium there are many universities where you can study translation, and each university has got some courses that others don't, and vice versa. So you have to keep that in mind. Plus, what I'm gonna say, it's also linked to my teachers. And if you ask another student that was maybe in the same university as me but had a different teacher, the opinion and the content of the course is going to be different. So yes, keep that in mind. The disclaimer is done, but before we start, I just wanted to let you know that if you want to know more about the first year of translation and interpreting in Belgium, I have done a video about that. And if you need any tips to pass your first year of translation in Belgium, I've also made a video about that. Honestly, you can apply most tips also to the second year and maybe the third one. The master degree, I don't know, but first year, second one, and maybe the third, yes. With that being said, let's start. So first, I'm gonna talk about the general courses, then the French ones, and then I'm going to talk about my program, which is English and Spanish. So first, general courses. We had History of International Relations. That was a big course because it was 3 hours a week, and usually we only had 1 hour a week, or maybe 2 hours. But yes, having 3 hours a week, it was the first time, and we learned a lot of content during those 3 hours a week. So be ready because, there's a lot. First, introduction. Then, proto-international relations. Idealism, liberalism, realism, neoliberalism, neo-realism, neo-Marxism, international political, economy, transnationalism, constructivism, and critical theory. So that's a lot, and I hope I have pronounced them right. If not, sorry, hope you understood the idea. But yeah, we talked about many different kind of movements, and you have to be careful with the knowledge of movement and concept, because during the exam I made that mistake, which ended up into an episode maybe a month ago, which was called Last Minute Tip to Pass Your Exams. Read well the instructions, because the teacher was asking for 2 concepts and I answered with 2 movements, but everything I've just said, idealism, etc., they are movements in the history of international relations, and inside each of those movements you're gonna find dates, concepts, and authors. So you have to be careful not to think it's the same thing, because it is not. At first I didn't really understand that course, but once I understood it, which was unfortunately 3 days before the exam, oh my gosh, I just loved it. I thought it was really interesting, and it's really important to know about our history to be able to better understand the present. So At first, wasn't a big fan, but then and now I love it. And the second course that we had as a general course was called New Technologies. And we learned about Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, and MemoQ, which is a software that translators use to translate projects. And so you might be thinking, right, but I know how to use Word, I know how to use Excel. Well, that's what I thought too, but nope. I mean, of course, knowing the basics, it was good, but we went way much deeper than the basics, like writing a text on Word. Yes, a lot deeper. For example, we learned how to create a table of contents, and personally, I had no idea about how to create such a thing, so we learned how to do that. And in Excel, for example, we learned how to create an invoice or a bill. I don't know. But the thing that you send to people to get paid. And of course, it's not tomorrow that I'm gonna need to know how to create a table of contents or a bill, invoice, however you call it. But it's really useful and good to know where to find on my computer to get those informations. Or maybe I'm gonna remember that. Who knows? So it's not helpful for tomorrow, but knowing that in a certain part of my brain, it is really helpful. And now, French courses. It was divided into two parts: spoken French in practice and writing French in practice. In spoken French in practice, we had to try to improve the speed of our speech, also work on the volume, the intonation, the pauses, and broadly speaking, that's what we saw. And as it was spoken French, and we had to work on all of that, we had to do it by speaking to the classmates, speaking to them in front of them, like going to the scenario, can you say that, of the classroom, and talk to them about a subject that you had been working on for the past 10 minutes, of course. It wasn't really an improvisation. Can you say that? I hope so. And so you had worked on what you were gonna say, but then being in front of your classmates, it can create a lot of stress. And that's pretty much it for spoken French in practice. Now, writing French in practice, it was a little bit like lexicology last year, but not exactly the same. We still had to know a lot of words with their definitions, and synonyms, antonyms, and a sentence with that word that would make sense. But to that, you can add the paraphrase or rewording, and also summary. So in the end, it was even harder than lexicology that we had last year, because you had words, but also summary and paraphrase. And it always surprises people when I tell them that yes, the French lessons are the hardest one, but it's just because as translators or interpreters, we are gonna have to translate in our native language, which is French, because in my university we speak French. So we have to master the French language 1,000%. And in our daily lives, we use it, but we don't really care about the way that we use the French language. And having to think about it and be like, okay, do I have to put an S at the end of that word or no? What's the rule, blah, blah, blah? Or is that exactly that word that I should be using? Or should I be using another one, a synonym? But does that synonym have the same meaning exactly, blah, blah, blah? Oof, that's really hard. Most people, most of my friends, most students are gonna tell you that the French lessons are the hardest ones. Yes, hardest ones. And now I'm going to talk about my program, which is English and Spanish. In my university, most programs are English plus another language, but you have some exceptions. There is Dutch plus German, so they don't have any English courses, but they are a minority, and most people have English plus another language. So English, we had mastering the English language, which was divided into two parts, the lexicology part and the oral practice part. So in lexicology, we saw vocabulary about politics in the UK and in the USA, because the vocabulary is the same for some words, but it's also different for other words. Then we talked about social media, idioms, using animals, parts of the body, colors, etc. And we also talked about false friends between French words and English words. And so for all of that vocabulary, you had to be able to explain it. Not to know the definition, but be able to explain it, yes. And you had to be able to translate it from English to French and French to English. And for the oral practice part, it was a bit like the spoken French in practice, but in English. And we especially talked about poetry, and we had to analyze a poem. And that was the main exercise of the semester. Now, English grammar, we talked about the modal auxiliaries and how to make a difference between the gerund and the present participle. And then English translation, no surprise, we had to be able to translate a text from English to French, because you always translate in your native language, in your mother tongue, French for me. And for that course, we had two different teachers, and it was really interesting to see that the result of the translation was the same, but the path to get there was a bit different. So yes, really nice to have two different point of views. And for that course, it was a bit of theory, like the do's and don'ts, while translating. But in the end, it was just a lot of practice, lots of homework, lots of text that you just had to translate, etc., etc. And now, Spanish language. Just like the English part, we had mastering the Spanish language. That was also divided into two parts, lexicology and oral practice. In lexicology, we saw vocabulary about society, like drugs. We talked about, what did we talk about? Surrogacy also. Basically topics about the society. And we had another theme that was about the work environment, employment, job, etc. And then in oral practice, it was a bit like interpreting, but not really, in the idea that the teacher would read a text to us in Spanish, and we had to take notes in Spanish or in French. And then, using the notes that you had taken, you had to tell your neighbor about the text that the teacher had just said, but you had to do it in French. So that's like an introduction to interpreting. And we still did some audio description. Then Spanish grammar, we talked about tense agreement, past tenses, and also the use of the different prepositions in Spanish. And we talked about other subjects, but the main ones were those three that I've just said. And then Spanish translation, We only had one teacher for that course and not two like the English translation, but it wasn't a problem at all. And just like for English translation, a little bit of theory, but in the end, lots of practice, lots of homework, lots of exercises, and that's pretty much it. I hope that this episode has been helpful, and if you have any questions, you can write them in the YouTube comments, Spotify comments, and also on Instagram. And if you have something more private to ask me about the courses, etc., you can send me a DM on Instagram. I'm gonna write in the description of the episode the 3 different videos I talked about. So the content of the first year, the tips to have a successful year of translation, and also a last minute tip before an exam. That's it for me. See you next week. Bye.